I'm Kwon Jang-won, and it's good to have you with us. It's Armed Forces Day in South Korea, the day where Korea celebrates its military history and prowess. But with inter-Korean relations improving, this year's proceedings are rather more muted, with the day starting off with the return of the remains of South Korean soldiers killed in the Korean War. For more on today's events and the other headlines of the day, we first turn to Devin Whiting at the News Centre. Devin.
Hi, Jang-ho. For Armed Forces Day, President Moonjae-in invited more than 200 veterans and military officials to the Blue House for a celebratory luncheon in which he called for a stronger military to ensure lasting peace on the peninsula. Have a listen.
그 어느 때보다 튼튼한 국방이 중요합니다. 우리가 힘이 있고 우리를 지킬 수 있는 자신감이 있을 때 평화가 지속될 수 있습니다.
With the top commanders of U.S. forces Korea also in attendance, President Moon stressed the importance of the U.S.-Korea alliance. He also said that the strength of the armed forces comes from the trust of the people and called for complete military reform. Lots of changes are underway militarily following President Moon's summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un last month, in which an agreement was signed to immediately halt all hostile military acts. Also today, the remains of 64 South Korean soldiers killed in the Korean War were returned to their homeland. President Moon attended the repatriation ceremony and paid his respects to the fallen heroes. Cha Sang-mi has this report.
The remains of 64 South Korean troops killed in the Korean War returned to their homeland Monday morning. The remains, which were found in North Korea, were brought back from Hawaii, where they had been jointly identified by South Korea and the United States. President Moonjae-in solemnly burned incense at the repatriation ceremony at Seoul Air Base, where the remains were honorably welcomed as they were taken off the special transportation aircraft. The president also paid individual tribute before each basket of remains and awarded them with Korean War medals. He was joined by 60 other people for the repatriation ceremony, including Chung Kyung-do, the nation's defense minister, Vincent Brooks, the commander of the United Nations Command, and a number of Korean War veterans. The war remains were sent off with a rifle volley salute and moment of silence. Then, escorted by the military police, they were transported to the Defense Ministry's Agency for Killed in Action Recovery and Identification to go through the identification process. Once the bodies are identified, they will be sent to the bereaved families and laid in the National Cemetery. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Now, some of those soldiers' remains were excavated more than 20 years ago, but it took a long time to identify them as South Korean. Together, South Korea and the U.S. carried out tests on them 3 times in this decade. Park Hee-jun explains.
64 South Koreans who died during the Korean War nearly 70 years ago finally got to rest in peace after a long-awaited journey home. The remains were first excavated through joint operations by North Korea and the U.S. between 1996 and 2005 in the North's Hamgyeongnam-do and Pyeongan-namdo provinces. Believed to be troops who fought alongside U.S. forces, they were transferred to the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency in Hawaii for identification. Their forensics experts confirmed that a great many of the casualties were Asian, information that was sent to Seoul's Defense Ministry earlier this year. South Korea and the U.S. conducted joint identification tests on the bodies 3 times in 2011, 2015, and 2018. And results showed that the remains were those of South Korean troops who fought during the Korean War. A repatriation ceremony for the war dead was held in Hawaii, where South Korea's Vice Defense Minister Seo Ju-seok accepted the remains from the DPAA. The 64 sets of bodies were then finally returned home on Sunday. According to the Defense Ministry, 28 sets of remains have been returned so far on 3 occasions. But this is the largest such repatriation of South Korean soldiers made by the DPAA. After respects were paid to the fallen war heroes on Monday, which marks the 70th Armed Forces Day, the 64 sets of remains will be sent to South Korea's Ministry of National Defense for KIA recovery and identification. It will identify the individuals so that they can once again be reunited with their families. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
And on this Armed Forces Day, South Korea will honor the service and sacrifices of each and every member of the armed forces in a ceremony this evening at the War Memorial of Korea. Unlike some previous years, this year's ceremony will not include large military parades, Instead, it will feature the South Korean military's future combat systems, like the Army's Warrior platform and drone bots. This will be the first time the ceremony's been held at night, too, and will feature performances by K-pop artists, including Psy. The South Korean Navy says it will continue to talk with Japan's naval forces about their controversial plan later this month to fly the Imperial-era Rising Sun flag on a vessel taking part in an international naval event in waters near Korea's Jeju Island. Seoul's foreign ministry says it's also communicated with Tokyo over the issue. It explained that Japan needs to proactively consider the way the Korean people feel about the Rising Sun flag, which is viewed as an emblem of Japan's wartime aggression and imperialism. Japan has so far rejected Seoul's request not to hoist the flag, based on the reasoning that the country's maritime self-defense force is required by law to fly it. Starting today, South and North Korea are removing landmines from the demilitarized zone and from the joint security area in Panmunjom. It's part of implementing the military agreement signed at the recent Inter-Korean summit in Pyongyang. Both sides will be removing the mines through October 20th. During the process, officials from the South, the North, and UN Command will discuss new operational rules for soldiers working in the JSA after it's demilitarized. The two Koreas will also be removing mines from the Arrowhead Plateau to look for the remains of both South and North Koreans killed during the Korean War. That operation will run through November 30th. The two sides will also discuss the possibility of tourists and visitors being allowed to visit both sides of the JSA. Turning to the economy, South Korea's Trade Ministry has released its preliminary data on exports and imports for September. For the fifth month in a row, outbound shipments topped $50 billion. Our business correspondent Kim Hae-sung reports.
Korea recorded $50.6 billion of exports in September, passing the $50 billion mark for the fifth consecutive month. On year, the figure is down 8.2%, falling by the sharpest margin in over 2 years. But the decline is likely due to fewer working days.
There were 4 fewer working days in September due to the Chuseok holiday, resulting in a fall of around $8 billion. But average exports per working day jumped 10.6% on year, recording $2.59 billion, the highest on record.
These strong export figures came on the back of robust semiconductor exports, which increased more than 28% on year last month to record $12.4 billion. Petroleum goods exports also expanded by double digits on strong demand and rising oil prices. But Korea's other major exports, including autos, machinery, and ships, all fell. Imports dropped 2.1% to around $41 billion, leading to a trade surplus of $9.7 billion last month, the 80th consecutive month of surplus. Between January and September, Korea's exports hit a record high total of $450 billion, up 4.7% on year. But the Trade Ministry pointed to the escalating U.S.-China trade spat, the U.S. rate hike, and slowing emerging market growth as downside risks, and vowed to secure auto tariff exemptions from the Trump administration as well as diversify Korea's exports. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
First, it was the US President Donald Trump, then South Korean President Moonjae-in. And finally on Saturday, it was the turn of North Korea's Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho to give his speech at the UN General Assembly in New York. As expected, it was a much more toned-down speech compared to last year when he was trading insults and threats of war with President Trump. But blame was still placed on the US for being the reason behind these stalled denuclearization talks. We'll look further at North Korea's stance after this report on Ri's speech by our reporter, Oh Jung-hee.
Trust was the key word for North Korea at this year's UN General Assembly.
North Korea's commitment to thoroughly implement the North Korea-US joint statement is unwavering. The primary task for effectively implementing the statement is bringing down the barrier of decades-long mistrust between the two countries.
Pyongyang's Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho highlighted that North Korea has taken several goodwill measures to build trust with the U.S., like halting nuclear missile tests and dismantling its nuclear test sites, but has not been able to see anything in return. He said Washington is rather upping the pressure through sanctions, which only deepens bilateral mistrust. While North Korea has a firm will to denuclearize, Ri said, that can only happen when Pyongyang can trust Washington. In other words, North Korea won't unilaterally denuclearize without an assurance on its regime security. Though the message presses Washington to take action, it differs greatly from Ri Yong-ho's own speech at the same venue last year, where he threatened real strikes against the U.S. There, he sought to justify North Korea's nuclear development, citing the U.S. threat shown through military drills with South Korea and President Trump's aggressive rhetoric like fire and fury. He also lashed out at Trump, calling him a, quote, mentally deranged person. This year, there was no mention of Trump. Ri instead chose to criticize hardliners in the U.S. for hindering negotiations, which is seen as a move to keep the friendly atmosphere between the two leaders going. All in all, Ri's speech showed Pyongyang wants to continue its dialogue with the U.S., but at the same time it hinted North Korea could pass the blame on to Washington if negotiations end in failure. 오정희, Arirang News.
Now, to look further at that speech, as well as other issues related to North Korea, we have with us Dr. Bong Young-sik from the Yonsei Institute for North Korean Studies. It's great to have you with us here again.
Pleased to be here again.
So last year, Ri Yong-ho, the North Korean foreign minister, described Trump as a mentally deranged person and threatened to continue building North Korea's nuclear weapons. This time, he didn't even mention Trump, and he's promised the North's sincerity in its plans to denuclearize. It's quite a startling change of tone. What are your thoughts on Ri's speech this year?
Well, I mean, it depends on what kind of expectation you apply to his message. Some people would say that it's definitely toned down compared to the speech by the same person delivered last year, in which a U.S. president was called mentally deranged. And when the United States deployed the B-1B bomber deep, very close to the territorial airspace of North Korea, then outside the United Nations building, for Mr. Ri Yong-ho threatened that whatever Trump might think, he is going to see something bigger than that. And in response to the speech by U.S. President Donald Trump last year that the little rocket man is on suicide mission, and if things go in a wrong direction, then North Korea is inevitably completely destroyed. So not seeing that war of wars at this time may be regarded as a positive sign. But at the same time, the fact that in Minister Ri Yong-ho's speech, there is no concrete indications that North Korea is going to take concrete steps toward denuclearization or any new promises about dismantling its nuclear facilities or missile parts. That might be considered a disappointing aspect of his speech.
So, but if you look at Ri's speech, I mean, he hasn't shown any concrete steps towards denuclearization, but he argues that it's the US that needs to take steps now to take action to show its countermeasures after the North Korea has shown other measures, such as shutting down like certain missile test sites and things like that. I mean, but do you think the US has to respond in some way to this now? Or actually, I mean, the question is who holds the cards here, really? Because the US is making demands and North Korea is making demands here in this speech.
Regardless of which side is right with its argument, I think the United States is holding the trump card because in an analogy of a poker game, United States has far more chips. So United States can win the waiting game vis-a-vis North Korea, because what North Korea is insisting is that you have to take concrete actions in order to verify we can trust you. Ri Yong-ho used the same word, trust, 18 times in his speech, which lasted 15 minutes. So he emphasized trust in the absence of any action that verifies the reason that North Korea can trust the United States as a current adversary, then North Korea will not unilaterally disarm herself with its nuclear weapons and missiles. But United States responds that without concrete actions by North Korea, United States cannot trust North Korea. So United States will not unilaterally lift economic sanctions on North Korea. So both sides are basically demanding the same thing to each other. Then in that stalled negotiation, then the United States is better suited to give time for this stalemate. Because North Korea is bleeding under very tough and harsh economic sanctions. And it is very clearly indicated in Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho's speech that North Korea wants to have the entire world believe that economic sanctions must be lifted as long as North Korea is not going to take another provocations or conduct another missile or nuclear test. But we all know that the very reason why economic sanctions have been in place is because North Korea has conducted nuclear tests and missile tests. So maintaining status quo cannot be regarded by the international community as sufficient reasons for it to lift economic sanctions on North Korea.
Sure, but I mean, if you look at Ri's speech, he says, we haven't been testing nuclear missiles, we haven't been testing nuclear bombs. Why are we keeping the international sanctions on us? They're saying, isn't it time that we reconsider this? But do you think there's any leeway that the UN would reconsider having these sanctions on them, or maybe finding some wiggle room to ease it a little bit either?
No, I don't think that's the United Nations Security Council would work. As I said, that the main purpose of those economic sanctions authorized by a series of United Nations Security Council resolutions is to turn the clock back, not to maintain status quo. Clock back to the time that North Korea was without those missiles and nuclear weapons that threaten so many countries, including the United States across the Pacific Ocean. So if North Korea wants those United Nations Security Council resolutions to be removed, then North Korea has to go back to the conditions in which it did not have those ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that are allegedly able to top nuclear warheads and hit any part of the United States.
So North Korea, in his speech, Ri Yong-ho also attacked the UN command that's stationed in South Korea as well. He said they're meant to be an allied forces unit, but they're actually just being led by the US, and it's just a US force. That's pretty much, if I just sum up what he said. Do you think, Ri has a point? I mean, can we consider it that way as well?
Minister Ri has a point as far as it is correct that the United Nations Command is led by the chief, who happens to be the commander of the U.S. forces in South Korea. But that is a fulfillment of the United Nations mandate. So it was kind of weird that he made this point in the United Nations, which actually authorized the U.S. forces in South Korea command to assume that position to lead the United Nations command, in accordance with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 84, which was passed after North Korea's invasion of South Korea in June 2050. So on the surface, yes, it is true that the military head of the U.S. forces in South Korea is assuming the top position of the United Nations Command, but there's a lot more important, legal and political, as well as security considerations behind this phenomenon.
Yes, Ri did seem to have mixed messages towards the UN during his speech. On one side, saying, you should help us, on the other side, blaming them for some of the issues that they're having. So he had some issues there. But
I think the main purpose of he addressing this point is to try to drive the wedge between the United States and South Korea, because there's a little bit of the difference in opinions between the United States and South Korea about the agreements South Korean government made with the Kim Jong-un regime of North Korea in the Pyongyang Declaration about these confidence-building measures and arms reduction measures between the two Koreas.
So Ri, in this speech, he might have toned down his rhetoric compared to last year, but still, I mean, he was still making demands of the US. On the other hand, Donald Trump hasn't given any official response, but he did say in a rally this week that, after received letter from Kim Jong-un, that they both fell in love. That's what he said. I mean, what do we make of this response? I mean, does the US have a response to Ri's comments or not?
Well, we have to wait and see the outcome of the next visit by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to Pyongyang, and potentially another meeting between North Korea and the United States in Vienna. Whether the United States will be successful in persuading the North Korean regime to make additional steps toward the denuclearization, then what President Trump said, that they were in love. And it was a right decision to put trust in Kim Jong-un regime for its commitment to denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula was a right decision, will be proven the correct one. But if those meetings will not result in the positive outcomes, if North Korean leadership continue to resist making additional steps toward the denuclearization while insisting that it is the turn of the United States to take proactive actions in response to North Korea's action, then I cannot rule out that the Trump administration may overnight change its attitude 180 degrees in favor of the maximum pressure, including expressed in harsh rhetorics like a lot of words from the Bible, like limestone, fire and fury, and whatnot.
Let me move on to something else today as well. So today, South Korea celebrates its Armed Forces Day, the 70th anniversary, in fact. And before, we would have had big military parades as well to show off its military hardware. But today it seems a little different tone. For example, this morning, that there was the remains of 64 South Korean soldiers who were killed in the Korean War that were identified in the US are now coming back to South Korea today. I mean, these bodies were found in North Korea and sent from North Korea to the US, and that's how it was discovered. I mean, what significance does this have? I mean, do you think this kind of thing puts pressure again on the situation that South and North Korea are still, on the opposite sides of this conflict, which is officially still ongoing?
Well, this is a very good sign from many different angles. It is such heartwarming development that the fallen soldiers finally returned home after they made utmost sacrifice with their precious lives during the war. They could, rest in peace. And this shows a very good intention and a good positive spirit of the United States as a security partner of South Korea, that the United States, having received those remains of the unidentified fallen soldiers sent from North Korea for the past 10 years or even longer, and identify them and return them to South Korea, that shows how strong and cooperative both allies are, despite some minor differences in opinion about the management of the alliance, and it's a collective dealing with North Korea's threat.
Yes, it was very emotional, I'm sure, for many as well in South Korea. One other development, South Korea and North Korea have begun removing landmines from the shared border area, from the DMZ and the Joint Security Area. It's the first step towards carrying out the military agreement that the two Koreas signed during the last summit in North Korea. How significant a step is this?
Well, this is a very significant and positive step, because South Korea and North Korea should not remain idle if there's a negotiation stalled between the United States and North Korea about denuclearization of North Korea. You have to do what you have to do in order to improve the security conditions on the Korean Peninsula. And this is a very good first step for South Korea and its allies to probe the true intentions of North Korean leadership about reducing the tension on the Korean Peninsula, including its future decisions with regard to its WMDs, including nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles. So this is a very good, I would say, the litmus test to gauge the willingness of North Korean leadership to make so-called right choices.
I mean, but there's so many landmines in this border area. They say it's the most landmined area in the world, they say. Do you think it's possible to get rid of all these landmines?
Well, they're just saying that going 1,000 miles begins with the first step, right? One step. So you have to begin where you can. But I'm a little bit concerned about its long-term consequences. For instance, what if there is a massive defections occurred from North Korea when DMZ, demilitarized zone, will become safe to travel? Then you will have a very, explosive repercussions, politically speaking, to the leadership stability in Pyongyang and the receiving North Korean people in massive scale to South in a short period of time will be a big challenge to South Korean government in its public as well. So I'm all for reducing tension and making demilitarized zone demilitarized, literally, but at the same time you have to consider it's a long-term and potentially unexpected consequences on inter-Korean relations and domestic politics.
Right, so that's where we'll end it. Thank you for coming in today and sharing your insights as always.
You're welcome.
I'll be back same time tomorrow, but do stay tuned to Arirang for our later newscast for more on the latest from Korea and the rest of the world. Thank you for watching and hope you can join us again next time. Goodbye.
Get all the news happening in and out of Korea from the perspectives of foreign correspondents. Foreign correspondents bring in different journalists from all over the world to sit down and discuss the most recent